Gervonta Tank Davis knocks out Frank Martin in the 8th round. Now, some would say the narrative of this fight is that Frank Martin won the early rounds and then the momentum shifted in the second half of the fight and Gervonta took over. I completely disagree with that narrative. I say Tank Davis was in control of the fight right from the outset and just imposed his will on Frank Martin before he finally took him out in the 8th round. Now, if we go round by round and look at the scorecards, I feel that we lose the forest for the trees, so to speak. Because yes, we do have to score early rounds for Frank Martin. But let's take a look at how Tank controlled the fight, even from round 1. Tank started out round 1 with a double high guard where he had both hands high, framing his forehead and his elbows in tight, and then he just kept that super compact defensive shell as he walked Frank Martin down. So the footwork Tank was using was kind of that skip step where his lead right foot was always in front of his left foot. And so in a nice relaxed manner, always again staying very compact with his upper body, Tank would approach Frank Martin. And of course, Frank Martin would oblige and unleash combinations simply because Tank was not being offensively minded for pretty much the first 2 rounds. Now, every now and again, Tank would fire off hard jab right hands and then occasionally a right hook. A jab left hand and then a right hook. But for the most part, it was all Frank Martin trying to use his jab to set up his combinations, which he did. And Frank was using adept footwork and moving around the ring quite nicely, trying to keep the action more or less in the center of the ring. Now, between rounds 2 and 3, we hear Calvin Ford tell Tank Davis, look, keep making him work. Now, this points back to my pre-fight breakdown where I said that the way you coach Tank Davis and the way a Calvin Ford can coach Tank Davis is much different than how Frank Martin needs to be coached. And that's simply because Calvin Ford and Tank Davis have been together as a pair since day 1. So they both know each other inside and out, I'm sure. And while the instructions, keep making him work, may not penetrate other fighters and have them automatically know what the trainer means by that, I think obviously Tank knows exactly what Calvin meant. By him saying, keep making him work, he's acknowledging, like, you're doing the right thing, you're making him work, keep doing that, and maybe amp it up just a little bit. So coming into round 3, Tank does exactly that. He's still pressing forward on Frank Martin. Sometimes he uses that double high guard, right, just to shell up and let Martin unload on him. But sometimes he also is now starting to switch to have both arms kind of across his chest, where he has his left fist kind of on top of his right fist. And it's a very relaxed position. Tank is still using that sort of skip step with his lead right foot always in front of his left foot, and he's pressing Frank Martin, but from that more relaxed position with his hands by his chest, Tank's able to unload with powerful shots. And the key thing here is he's able to do it in a very relaxed manner, because that's a very relaxed guard. When you fire shots from a relaxed position, you're not going to telegraph it. It's the people who are super stiff and really trying hard to land a hard punch that telegraph their punches. That sort of cross-arm guard position also makes it really easy for Tank to fire hard body shots, which he does start. So in that like 3rd, 4th round, Tank's kind of alternating between that double high guard when Martin's unloading, and then he's also walking him down with that relaxed sort of cross chest guard. It's really not a shell guard because he's not turning and twisting and it's not tight. It's just nice and loose at chest height. Now by the third round, Tank's landed enough hard shots that Frank Martin has felt his power, and to his demise, Frank starts sort of going a little bit more in retreat mode and going backwards. And I'll break down Frank's fatal flaws in the second part of this video, but just by having Frank shift his movement like that, it's showing us that Gervonta is in charge of what's going on in that ring. That's true ring generalmanship, as we call it. Now, towards the middle third of the fight, Gervonta now feels so comfortable that he shifts from using that sort of skipping footwork where the lead foot's always in front. He shifts from that to simply just walking like you just walk down the street, right? Right foot in front, then left foot, then right foot. And Gervonta starts carrying his hands low, not all the way down, but just much lower than even chest height at times. And what this does is just, again, it shows how relaxed he is. It helps him conserve his energy. It's a super relaxed position for him to throw hard shots from. And by him conserving his energy, he's forcing Frank Martin to use more energy, just moving backwards from him. Again, just shows that Gervonta is in complete control throughout all of these rounds, even if you want to score the round in Frank Martin's favor because he's landing more punches. The question here is, are they effective? And the answer is, well, apparently not, because it wasn't enough to stop Gervonta from his march forward. So finally, in the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds, as we move towards that KO, Gervonta just simply picks up the pressure in terms of the ferocity of his punches, the timing of his punches. He's now honed in on when exactly to throw at Frank Martin. He knows how Frank is going to react, and by putting that much pressure on Frank Martin, Tank basically allows Frank to what's the expression, thrust himself on their own petard or something like that. Like, he basically allows Frank Martin to do himself in by trapping himself in the corner and then having to face these power shots from a power puncher. Now, the one other key moment that was caught on camera was all the way back in the 3rd round, where Gervonta feints like he's going to throw a hard left at Frank, and Frank flinches and turns sideways, turns his back, turns his head away from Gervonta. And I think in that moment, Tank knew that he absolutely mentally owned Frank Martin. And the bad thing is, Frank knew that Tank knew that he knew he owned him. If that makes any sense. So, complete mind game right there that Tank won. So I think that in that moment, I think that was the fight right there, because by getting Frank Martin to flinch like that, Tank knows, like, I own you mentally and spiritually, and then it's just a matter of time before, Frank Martin effectively gives up. Now, we could jump back even further to the, the weigh-in or a press conference where Tank again made a motion at Frank Martin, and Frank kind of flinched and went like he made a motion like he was gonna have to hit Tank back. And I think in that moment also Tank knew he got the better of Frank Martin. So, these mind games might seem trifling, but in the heat of the moment, it's like animalistic, and a fighter knows if he's got the other fighter's number, so to speak. Now, let's take a look at 3 or 4 absolutely fatal flaws that I kind of spoke about in the pre-fight breakdown. Fatal flaws of Frank Martin. Well, first one was evident right off the bat in the first round, and that was that Frank extended his jab as a slow jab, as a pawing jab, and at times he would even post that jab, leaving it way out there, trying to post on Gervonta's head. Okay, so again, one of my pet peeves for boxers to do, because if you leave your jab hand out there, you're just asking, you have no guard and you're open for a shot. Now, the really bad thing is for Frank is that while he might be able to get away with that versus a righty, because Frank's right hand, quote unquote, cancel out with the orthodox fighter's left jab, right? They're just going to kind of cancel each other out. And we often see righty-lefty jab wars, so to speak. Well, on another southpaw, if you leave your jab out there, now you're completely open for either that your opponent's jab or their straight left. So it's even a more fatal flaw against someone who's fighting you on the same side. Now, the second odd fatal flaw that Frank Martin chose to employ was, remember I said he had 3 different guards. Well, he chose one that made the least sense, which is he had his lead arm up high, right? So instead of it just being double high guard, it was higher on his right hand. It was almost as if he's palming the top of his head with his right palm and keeping his elbow, his forearm right glued to the side of his head. Now, again, versus a right-handed fighter, that sort of makes sense because you're protecting your head against a lead left hook by a right-handed fighter. So for a righty fighting a lefty, you can throw a lead left hook, you can throw a lead right hand. You could throw the lead left right hand or the lead right left hand. It makes sense. So not only does it make sense, those are really bread and butter combinations that a right-handed fighter should throw against a left-handed fighter. That is a lead left right hand or a lead right hand left hook. But Frank's fighting another lefty, so that high right forearm guard does not make a lot of sense. And what made it worse for Frank was he would turn to his left side very obliquely, which, again, if he's fighting a righty, that would mean he's taking his head further away from the right-hander's power punch. But against a lefty, it makes no sense because now he's exposing the back of his head to the lefty's power punch, and because of the way Frank does it, he kind of leans over to his left. He doesn't just rotate his torso, but by leaning like that, he's now open for a right uppercut from a southpaw. So it's just not a good choice of guard, and I still don't understand why Frank chose that. Now, third fatal flaw that Frank Martin made, which was his undoing, was to move backwards along the ropes. So I can understand why he'd be in retreat mode to a certain extent, but there's no way to defeat the geometry of a square. So if you go along the side of a square, eventually you're going to wind up in the corner, also known as a vertex, right? So you will be stuck in the corner. You stuck yourself in the corner, which is the worst position to be in terms of positions in the ring, because there's no escape unless you have to pivot out to one side or the other, but you effectively trapped yourself, so that just makes no sense. Now, Frank didn't initially put his back directly against the ropes, but he was told by his trainer Derek James, I think it was after the 3rd or the 4th round, don't put your back against the ropes. Well, what Derek James means by that is, Frank had his left shoulder towards the ropes and he was going backwards. So even though his back per se wasn't against the ropes, he was trapping himself against the ropes as he's going backwards, eventually to wind up stuck in the corner where Gervonta could just unload power shots on him. So I mean, that was really the biggest fatal flaw, I think, that Frank displayed. Now, any fighter who's facing a power puncher and they create a habit of trapping themselves in a corner, it almost doesn't matter what combination the power puncher throws at you. You're effectively setting yourself up to get KO'd. And in this case, I kind of wonder if Frank Martin gave up, so to speak. I think in a sense he might have, because putting yourself against the ropes or in a corner is kind of the same thing in MMA as giving up your back, because it's kind of like, all right, let's just get this over with. Go ahead, take my back, choke me out. I'll tap or not, and I'll go out. But either way, there's such horrible positions that, I mean, I don't think there's any fighter delusional enough to think, oh, this is a great position for me to be in. I think I can pull a miracle here and get a KO from being trapped in the corner. Frank kind of alluded to that's what his thought process was like he was going to look for that counter shot off the ropes, but I don't buy that at all. He was told under no uncertain terms by his corner not to do that, and yet he still did that. So this leads me to the question as to why were these fatal flaws still in place on fight night? Surely there's no way Derek James put up with him sparring. There's no boxing trainer on the face of the earth that is going to tell their fighter, hey, you know what? This round, I want you to put your back against the ropes and then move backwards and trap yourself in the corner. Like, if anything, it's the exact opposite. My boxing trainer, Lennox Blackmore, read me the Riot Act. Maybe it was like the second sparring session I ever had with him, and I did just that, just decided to put my back against the ropes, and he just under no uncertain terms let me know that don't ever do that, because it's a position of weakness and you're just setting yourself up for trouble. There's no excuse for it, really. So what went on during the sparring sessions with Frank Martin? Now, I didn't bring this up in the pre-fight analysis because I'd only seen a little bit of this sparring footage of him, and where he actually did put himself on the ropes. But I didn't want to assume that that's, a habit, because it's just one round of one sparring session or something. So I'm not going to say that that's, I can't assume that that's what he always does. But if it's a habit, it's definitely one that needs to be broken, and it's unfortunate that Frank didn't address it yet, especially leading up to such a huge fight opportunity for him. The second thing two other things that concern me are, one, the pawing jab, because that's just a bad habit, whether he's fighting a righty or a lefty. In fact, and then that not understanding that the high guard versus a righty doesn't make sense versus a lefty. Like that, I would have thought that would have gotten worked out during his sparring sessions, versus I assume he's gonna spar with shorter southpaw pressure style fighters, because that's what he's dealing with in Tank Davis. So huge question mark for me about what did your sparring practice actually consist of, and what directions were you given during sparring? And then finally, so if Derek James did address all of these things during your training camp, why did you revert to these bad habits during the fight? That's something that they have to work out. Now, I don't want my critique of Frank Martin to take away from the outstanding performance of Tank Davis, because he fought a great fight. He looked relaxed and composed throughout, in spite of his 14-month layoff. He looked offensively strong. His footwork was good, and he just looked like what he is, which is a very special fighter, in that he makes it look easy, but Tank has a very deep understanding of how to pace himself, how to play those mind games with the other fighter. He understands when to turn it up. He understands how to figure out his distance and his punch placement, and he knows that it's okay for him to miss or for him to get clipped at times, but he makes whatever adjustments he needs to make to still, not only win the fight, but win the fight in a spectacular manner with basically, a KO. Now, it's actually not arrogance when Tank Davis, someone at post-fight press conference, somebody asked Tank Davis, between Ryan and Frank, who's the better fighter, or who gave you more difficulty, something like that. And he goes, and Tank says, neither one. And it sounds a little flippant, but it's actually accurate, because in the case of Ryan, Tank was correct in saying that Ryan does lack certain fundamentals, such as footwork, such as fighting on the inside, etc., such as slipping to one side, or being able to slip to both sides rather than just always to one side. That makes Ryan, I have to say, a C-level fighter, because if you can't fight on the inside, there's no way you could be a B-level fighter. Same thing with Frank Martin. So he is very athletic and he has some basics, but he has enough flaws that, again, keeps him in that C level. And I don't know if he can fight on the inside. So, in any case, I think Gervonta's accurate in saying, neither one of these guys are that great. It's true compared to where he's at. He's a high-level black belt world champion competitor, and these guys are basically, fairly athletic, but not, they're lacking in certain fundamentals, and they're definitely not on a high world-class black belt level. Now, the one question remaining is what's next for Frank Martin and what's next for Tank Davis. Unfortunately for Frank Martin, I feel like he's been exposed, basically, because up until this point, he looked pretty good against the competition he was facing. But we kind of now know that he doesn't do so well with a pressure style fighter, and that he still has these fundamental flaws that have not yet been addressed. Now, with Tank, on the other hand, he looked spectacular in this fight, and I think the world is his oyster, as we say. Not sure who do you guys want to see him fight next? Do you want him to rematch Ryan? I don't really think that's the fight for him to pick, but as they say, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. So I'm not sure that there's anybody else out there that could pose a challenge or even a threat to Gervonta. Unfortunately for Subriel Matias, he lost his belt and to Liam Paro over the weekend, so he can't really call out Gervonta at this point. But let me know what you guys think or thought about the fight. Let me backtrack for 1 second. Let's just take a look at the exact knockout moment. So here we have Frank Martin trapped himself against the ropes in the corner again. And what happens? Well, Tank catches him, I think, with a right hook. And Frank Martin does one of his fatal flaws. He sticks his jab hand out there and leaves it out there. So what does Tank do? He comes with his right hook, left uppercut, and that's the one that had Frank not quite out on his feet, but that had Frank drop both hands super low. He's completely defenseless. It doesn't matter what Tank throws next, but Tank chooses to throw basically a left kind of cross, and that takes Frank out. And that takes Frank out, and Tank knew it. He just turns on his heels, runs to the opposite corner, and salutes the crowds off the ropes, and then does his patented backflip. But in all honesty, it's not so much that combination that got Frank Martin out of there. It was just the accumulation of everything. I mean, and now that Frank's trapped in the corner, in a sense, it doesn't matter what Tank wants to throw. He's stuck there. Tank's gonna unload and just take whatever shot he saw open. So let me know what you guys thought of the fight. Who do you want to see Tank fight next? Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to reading your comments.